Rain came down hard enough to blur the world. In the rubber plantation at Long Tan, the trees stood in straight rows like soldiers, trunks black with water, leaves shining in the August light. On August 18, 1966, D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, about 100 men and a few New Zealand artillery observers, left the base at Nui Dat to look for trouble that had already found them. The night before, the base had taken mortar fire. The men were told to go out and find whoever had done the shooting. They moved in single file at first, boots sucking at the mud, packs heavy with radio batteries and spare rounds, each man carrying more weight than he had thought he could. The rain turned the ground to soup and flattened sound until a shout stopped an arm's length away. The plantation looked tame from a road, almost orderly, but inside the rows everything felt closer. Visibility came in short bursts, 20 meters, 30, sometimes less, when a curtain of rain moved through. Lieutenant Colonel Colin Townsend stayed at Nui Dat. Major Harry Smith led D Company into the trees. Sections fanned left and right. The men marked direction by the angle of the rubber rows and the pull of the compass, and by the voices of mates they trusted more than any landmark. The first contact was sudden. A small group of Viet Cong scouts fired and fell back. The Australians pushed after them and ran into a line that refused to give ground. It was an L-shaped ambush if the company had kept walking, but they stopped, went to ground, and fired back. The rain made sighting slow. Mud crept into actions. Radio calls went up for artillery. New Zealanders with 161 battery had already laid their guns. At Nui Dat, 105 and 106, field batteries began to fire for men they could not see, lifting and shifting hundreds of shells by voice and map and trust. The enemy were not just a few men. Intelligence later said elements of VC 275th Regiment and NVA main force units were there. Hundreds, perhaps 1,000 or more. The men in the rows felt it before anyone counted it. Movement on both flanks, muzzle flashes at the limit of vision, rounds whipping through leaves at head height. A section under 2nd Lieutenant Jeff Kendall took hits and fell back. Another under 2nd Lieutenant Gordon Sharp pushed forward until a sniper killed him. Sergeant Bob Buick took over and kept the gun team firing, squeezing more work out of a weapon than it was built to do. By mid-afternoon, the company had a rough perimeter. Small groups behind trees, machine guns on likely avenues, rifles on the gaps. Platoon radios coughed water and worked anyway. Medics moved at a crouch. The wounded were pulled into the shelter of trunks and propped with packs. The rain did not let up. It came steady, made heavier by wind, drumming on leaves and steel and skin. At Nui Dat, the artillery liaison officers worked slide rules and grease pencils to walk fire like a wall around D Company, then in front of them, then through the rows where the next wave built. Every adjustment was a risk. At one point, ammunition began to run low. Each man had gone out with plenty. In a fight that would not end, plenty was not enough. Runners moved along the line, collecting spare magazines from the dead and the quiet. The radio crackled with a request. Helicopters. The pilots of RAAF No. 9th Squadron were told the weather was bad and the area was hot, and went anyway. 2 Hueys came treetop low and kicked out boxes of ammunition, wrapped in ponchos. Men sprinted into the open, dragged the boxes back, and went straight to loading. The enemy came on in waves. The Australians felt the push in the way the fire tightened, in the voices rising on the net, in the sudden thump of grenades landing too close. Every time, the artillery cut lines through the plantation, the tree rows strobing with shrapnel. Some shells burst overhead in the leaves, a rain of splinters. Others punched into the ground and threw up red clay and roots. Machine gunners counted bursts, changed barrels by touch, and kept at it. Private Ray DeVere dragged a mate behind a tree and went back out again. Corporal Buddy Leah kept his section steady when the flank bent. The company commander kept asking the same hard question: hold or break out. To move would mean giving up the artillery umbrella. To stay meant holding against numbers that did not seem to run short. Smith chose to hold while he could, and then move only as far as the guns could follow. He called for Bravo Company and the armored personnel carriers from 1st APC Squadron to push through with relief. The roads were poor, and the rain got in everything. Still, they came. Some Australians heard whistles and calls in the trees and knew another rush was building. The gunners at Nui Dat ran near maximum rate, crews black with smoke and sweat, hands raw from handling charges and shells. American 155mm guns from 1st Battalion, 83rd Artillery, joined in, their heavier rounds thumping like doors slammed by a giant. The wall of steel wavered and then went forward again. Then came the heavy sound of engines and carriers pushing through mud. Tracks churned red water into fans. Men on the carriers fired as they rolled, faces streaked with rain and grime. The carriers pulled into the line and the perimeter breathed out, wider and stronger. Bravo Company came up behind them, spread left, and added new barrels to the arcs. By early evening the battle fell away. The enemy fire slackened. Rain still fell, but with the urgency drained out of it. The men on the line kept their rifles trained and their fingers cold on triggers. They held positions until the word came to stand easy, then did not, because standing was not easy anymore. On the ground in front of them, and in the rows beyond, lay the measure of what had tried to roll over them. In the dark, listening to the last shells land and the first orders for withdrawal and evacuation, they began to count their own. 18 Australians were dead, 24 were wounded. The counts for the enemy ran high as next day's searchers moved through. The numbers are still argued, but the men who survived did not need the totals to know what they had stood against. The talk afterward was quiet. A few spoke of the fear that arrived early and stayed useful, fear that kept hands steady and sights on the right line. Others spoke of mates who did not see the last light on the plantation. In the months and years that followed, Long Tan turned into a marker in Australian memory. Debate rose and fell about politics, the war, what it meant to fight in a place that seemed to absorb every drop of effort without changing. For the men there, the rain, the straight rows, and the weight of wet webbing stayed sharp. Some said they could still hear the guns at night, feel the sting of rubber leaves when a shell burst overhead. They remembered the relief that came on tracks and boots, and the flight of 2 brave helicopters that cut the distance between survival and the other thing. There is a kind of courage that does not look like posters. It looks like a radio operator tapping water out of a handset, a private crawling to reach a mate who isn't moving, a gun crew laying on another 40 rounds because the voice on the net says, "Left, repeat, left." It looks like standing where you are because your mates are standing there too. On a day when the sky fell in sheets, a small company stood in a plantation and did not break. They were not the only ones in that war to do so, and not the last. The trees have grown since then. The mud has settled, and the rain has found other roofs to beat. The memory stands anyway, like those rubber rows in the downpour, straight, patient, and holding the line. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.